Mark Walsh here from Pragmatic Personal Growth. So I want to look at the new McCarthyism and how we can reject that, maybe what are some of the kind of psychological roots of that. So you're probably aware, but maybe some of you aren't, that in the kind of 1950s, what happened in America is everyone was looking for Reds under the bed. Everyone was looking for communists. And this led to a kind of witch hunt of anyone, and actually kind of media industry, for example, was really affected by this. People lost their jobs. It was quite unpleasant. And I think this is a nice parallel for what's really happening with the kind of politically correct socialist justice warrior type world now. Particularly we see this in personal growth in my field, but in college campuses is where it started, perhaps spreading to other areas where people are really terrified to make reasonable, logical points about certain topics, certain conversations. Essentially, Jonathan Haidt, H-I-A-D-T, would be a good starting place for understanding this. He talks about these sacred groups of the left, 7 sacred groups of the left. So if you're in one of these groups, identity politics basically says you get your opinion matters more. So it's not what you say, it's who you are, which is something I disagree with straight away, right? Something I disagree with straight away. The sacred groups are saying, for example, women perhaps be the biggest one, blacks, Hispanics, gays. The kind of newer ones are Islam and trans. So these are the sort of 2 kind of really hot ones right now. You have to be very, very careful with. And his argument is that these groups are not just protected, because of course any reasonable person, I think any reasonable kind of new conservative would agree with this. We don't want anyone to be persecuted on discriminated against on behalf of their gender, religion, whatever. However, it's got really extreme, hasn't it? It's got really extreme in the disproportionate responses, the disproportionate amount of attention being applied to this, and the way in which people are witch hunted for even the slightest microaggression, implicit bias. It's like looking for smaller and smaller examples of being, not a communist, but an a prejudiced person, has got really ridiculous, and it's got really scary. And what I've seen happen is that I found myself not willing to speak out and self-censoring, and I noticed that and went, no, that's not cool, because what I want to say is fair and reasonable and logical and isn't, some sort of Nazi attack. We're tired of the name calling, aren't we? Are you tired of the name calling? I am. That you're getting called a misogynist. It's like, no, it's someone that hates women. You can't just spread that term to someone who doesn't agree with radical feminism. Go after the people who are discriminating in the workplace and not employing people on behalf of their ethnicity or whatever. Great, I'm with you 100%. I'm with you. But the kind of not being able to in any way critique Islam, that seemed problematic because it's a set of ideas and can be critiqued like any other, right? So Haidt says these groups are actually sacred. So it's sacred to go it's like a sin to go after them. That's the first thing that's going on here. In the absence of kind of religious sacredness, which has been stripped out of Western culture, we look for sacredness elsewhere. So you'll see them, say, people with their football clubs. That's the kind of tribal sacredness for some people. It's beyond just a bit of fun on a Saturday for them. And the same with the liberal left, the reactionary left particularly, made sacred weakness. And groups that seem persecuted. So if enough people persecute, not even persecute, if enough people even critique Islam, right, those people are now the poor persecuted people. The Jewish example is very interesting because they were the persecuted people, but now they're the persecutors, according to various people. And, there's a case for that. And they've sort of switched groups, and now they're the sort of hated group of the left. If you try and claim any persecuted status by saying, look, I think it's okay that you disagree with me, it's okay that you criticise me, insult me, a bit less okay, trying to get my work closed down, as happened to me not long ago by a group of yoga people who are upset with me, not okay. And I said, look, this is not cool, this is oppression, this is persecution. And people really reacted because I was trying to claim what they would regard as sacred victim status. People are very upset about that. And you get mocked quite strongly. Oh, you poor white guy, you poor person. And it's like, look, I'm just saying you're not being polite. You're coming onto my Facebook and swearing at me. That's just not civil, So the sacredness of these of victimhood, I think, is the first thing to understand. I mean, as much as anything, it's just people looking at what social psychologists call an out-group, right? So this is what the Nazis did with the Jews. It's like, we're all German, the Jews are out to get us, the Jews are the bad ones, hate them, and then the out-group gets created, which is very bonding for the in-group. That's something people tend to do. There's lots of classic psychology studies that show that like people make an out-group over almost anything. I make jokes about this on my on my, I'll divide in my trainings. I'll divide the room into two, and it'll be like the window people or the right hand room people, and straight away the response is to demonize the outside group and say your own group is better. So I think some of it's just a sort of an easy way of making out grouping. The virtue signaling, of course, the classic, like, I am not a sexist and a racist and a homophobe or Islamophobe, whatever it is. It's them. And what we see in that is like people protesting a bit too much, sometimes literally. We could look at this as shadow projection. So this is a Jungian idea. We all have parts of ourselves that we don't like, parts of ourselves which are sort of repressed, which society says we're not allowed. For example, we'll have an aggressive part of us. And I've had people say to me, "You're so aggressive!" And I'm just sitting there going, wow, that's really aggressive how you're saying that. And they're totally blind to it. So I wonder if the shadow projections are part of it, like, I'm good and pure, or my group are good and pure, but you're evil. I think that's definitely part of what's going on here. I wonder, for example, in Islam, which has this kind of persona of being, hyper masculine, aggressive. I wonder if that's not the repressed kind of masculine in this kind of feminized world, kind of coming out sideways for this sort of weird love of Islam that's going on in the regressive left. It's really hard to understand. The sacred group stuff helps. The shadow stuff, I think, helps understand it as well. There's a kind of self-hatred at work, I would say, in some of this. It's kind of like, so any group that's against your culture, you then support, right? So if you're Western, and fundamentalist Islam is clearly against Western culture, explicit about that, then being pro-Islam is like the enemy of my enemy, and my enemy is myself. So I think that's a part of it. It's the feminization part's interesting here. Peterson talks about the kind of devouring mother. Or, a policeman once said to me, he said, men fight for status, women fight for kill, because in our evolution, if a woman fought, she was fighting for the survival of her children, the mama bear, mama lion, defending her cubs. And of course, once we think of ourselves as defending a victim, or if we see the other as evil, normal ethics go out the window. So the sort of just unpleasant behaviors, from sort of lack of manners and civility, right, to just awful things people do from the aggressive left. The reason they can do that is feel morally justified. Like, people say, would you shoot baby Hitler in the head? And you go, Pi goes, yeah, I might actually, because he's evil and therefore I'm morally justified. It's not just, it's this sense of like, well, they're evil, so we can do anything. Or I'm protecting someone's sweet. Like, I was walking on with my niece the other day and someone looked at her a bit in a creepy way. And my immediate reaction was, I'm going to fucking kill that guy. Very uncivilized kind of thought. I can own those kind of thoughts, unlike most of the aggressive left. I'm aware of my aggressive side. And there's sort of, and actually projecting that on that shadow side onto the other, demonizing the other as a result, and feeling morally justified in destroying utterly the other, which is this kind of archetypal kind of demonic protective mother archetype. So I think the sort of feminized society is part of this, and how that plays out. So just a few of my thoughts on this. I think, in terms of looking at this, it's also about not demonizing the other. So as a kind of, podcast for new conservatives interested in personal growth, I think to actually understand this a bit better, to actually get some understanding of where it comes from, is helpful. Because then we don't go into the leftist trap saying, well, they're just mentally ill, or they're just evil people. These are very unintelligent, kind of reduced answers. I get why you might say that. And we can be a little bit more compassionate, more understanding, and also see it in ourselves. So it's really easy for me, and I'm guilty of this on these podcasts, on these videos, to say, it's them on the aggressive left, and we're good and they're bad. And that's just falling into the same trap. And I think this is the difference between a kind of new, modern, more integral conservatism than kind of an old school one, which is just us good, you bad, and the other side is us good, you bad. It doesn't really get anywhere. Whereas in this, we can actually see, there's some ways in which we may have advanced or developed. No guilt about claiming that. However, understanding a little bit more where things come from, having a bit of compassion within that. So there's my first thoughts on this new McCarthyism, where it comes from, the kind of the seeming paradox between intolerant leftists. It doesn't seem to make sense, does it? It doesn't seem to make sense. So once you understand, I think some of these things, it starts to make a bit more sense. I still haven't got there. I still don't think I've really figured it out. I think I'm about halfway there at best. So if you've got stuff in the comments, please do. Please tell me your thoughts. Like, what the hell is going on with this psychologically? Because it's fascinating. It's fascinating, if nothing else. And as ever, like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this.